Hello. Welcome to tonight's bedtime story by Lucid Tales. I hope your day has been as kind as a summer breeze, but whether it has been pleasant daydreams or tense nightmares for you, it's time to relax now. Find somewhere comfortable, maybe your bed or a favourite armchair, and make sure you're ready for sleep. Take your shoes off if you can, and feel the freedom in your toes if you have them. The little loosening that means it's time for bed. Tonight's story is Queen Wren. Once upon a time, there was a queen who had a beautiful son, and he grew into a tall and handsome youth, strong, witty, and proud. But so proud was he that though his mother was kindly, he was cold to all, thoughtless and cruel to peasants and nobles alike, and not least to the princesses and noble young ladies who pursued him for a husband. He made jokes that cut, and his laughter held teeth. At last, his mother had had enough of her son's foolishness, and declared that she would hold a great feast, and eligible women from every family in the land would be present. Every queen, princess, duchess, and baroness came from hundreds of miles around. They lined up and were announced in the great hall, and the prince strode up and down, inspecting them like a general inspecting his troops, or a merchant examining horses. "Look at that nose," he laughed as he passed a kind and hard-working baroness. "What terrible taste," he snorted as he looked down on a learned and wise duchess. And so on he went, all the way down, until he came to a young queen who was charming in every way. But there was a twinkle in her eye, a brightness that made the prince think of a bird. "I'll call you Queen Wren," he said. "You'd never catch me married to someone so bird-brained, ha!" His mother grew angry. Her son had rejected every suitor in the most unkind and obnoxious way, and she would have no more of it. "The first woman to come to the gates tomorrow morning you will marry," she declared, "queen or beggar, and you will be sorry for what you have done." The next morning a wandering bard sat below the queen's window and sang a beautiful, haunting song, full of sadness and sweetness, and the queen at once invited her into the castle. "Your singing has earned you much today," she said. "This is my son. If you will have him, he will be your husband." Now the strolling player eyed the prince up and down in a very similar way to that he had shown the night before. "Does he have a strong back?" she asked. "He does," replied the queen. "And he isn't lame?" asked the woman with a twinkle in her eyes that spoke of mirth. "Show her you can walk, son," said the queen. After a few more questions, the bard agreed to marry the prince. He would be an asset. And so, humiliated, the prince left the castle with nothing but the clothes on his back and his new wife. Together they trudged through mud and rain and sun and heat, and the bard played music to earn their living while the prince sulked mightily. "Do not expect me to feed you after the third day," advised the beggar. "I will not have dead weight." "Then send me back," challenged the prince. The player laughed. "Oh no, my husband, I will not divorce you so soon. You're mine whether you like it or not." As they walked, the prince saw the kindness of the people in the villages they encountered, often giving the minstrels a penny or sharing food with them, though they had little enough themselves. As the days wore on, he became grateful for the scraps of food and the warmth of a hay barn, after nights sleeping under hedges or going hungry. They walked for many hundreds of miles, and the prince at last asked, "Whose land is this?" For the countryside around them was so beautiful and resplendent in the light of the setting sun. The bard laughed and sang, "Queen Wren rules both all, far and near. You could have shared in everything here." The further they walked, the more beautiful the land grew, and every time the prince asked who ruled it, the minstrel would laugh and say all of it was Queen Wren's. "I have been a fool," muttered the prince. "That you have," laughed his wife. Married to me less than a month, and all you can think of is another woman. Queens are far out of your reach now, husband of mine. You found your place. Now you must live here. And on they walked, the prince steeping further and further in regret, until they came to a small hut, a hovel with a chimney. "We are home, husband," said the beggar. "Oh, don't look so sad. It's all poor folks like us deserve, thanks to men like you used to be." So the prince's new life began. He could not play the bard's lute, and had no money for an instrument of his own. He had not cared to learn to sing, and so he found himself alone in the hut, cooking, cleaning, and washing clothes, while his wife was out earning their keep and making music with the other players and friends. "This will not do," said the bard one day. "I do well enough earning for one, but it's time you earned your keep. I shall buy pots, and you will sell them in the market." "But what if someone recognises me?" the prince demanded. The bard laughed. "Then you charge them double, dear husband, for they can certainly afford it if you deign to know them in your old life." The prince, in fact, did well selling pots in the market. For once he had overcome his disdain and realised that more pots sold meant more food to eat, he could be as charming as a devil. His youthful, handsome face and quick wit, now turned to selling and base flattery, made him popular with the women in the market, and some of them even slipped him extra money or food to take home. The prince and his wife were able to live happily for a time on the profit from the pots and the coins tossed into the bard's cap. But one day, oh calamity and disaster, a runaway horse and carriage crashed into the prince's stall and scattered and shattered every pot he had. Of course his wife was furious. "You are less than useless," she said. "All you are good for is hauling coal and eating. Get thee to the palace. They have a post for a kitchen porter, and that is all you are worth. They will feed you there, and you can bring scraps home for me too." All day long, the prince was up to his elbows in dishwater, or hauling great sides of meat to the fire, or turning the spit in the wicker wheel. His hands became rough and coarse with harsh soap and labour, and he collapsed into bed exhausted every night. Soon he grew even busier, as the palace prepared for a great ball. On the day of the party, the prince paused to peer through a door into the ballroom, his face covered in soot from the roasting fires, and hands greasy with fat, his pockets full of jars of scraps to take home to his wife. The great hall was full of beautiful people in fine clothes, dancing and eating and drinking without a care, reminding him of all he had lost. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he leaned sadly against the door frame. "It is my own fault," he admitted. "Had I not been so proud and foolish." He sighed. At that moment, the door suddenly opened, and behind it, to the prince's horror, stood Queen Wren herself, staring at him with that bright bird twinkle in her eye. Yet she came straight to the handsome youth, took his hands, grease and all, and swept him into the dance. As she did so, jars and packets of scraps that he had saved tumbled from the prince's pockets and rolled across the floor, while the whole room roared with laughter at the sight. He wished he could vanish without trace. He wished that the floor could swallow him up, that he had never stopped in that doorway to look. He turned to flee, and found the door blocked by a woman. It was Queen Wren again, with that twinkle in her eye. "Do not fear, young man," she said kindly. "Walk with me a while." They walked together, out into the dark garden and along the rows of beautiful flowers. "You do not recognize me?" the prince asked hopefully. The queen threw her head back and laughed, and the sound of it shook the prince with its familiarity. "It is you, dear friend, who does not recognize me, I think," she said, wiping the tears from her eyes. "I cannot blame you. I have taken many forms in my life, including that rascally bard, your loving wife. It seems that you have learned to give up your arrogance and prideful manner. I would be proud to call you my husband in this world." She gestured at the palace with its lit-up windows. "If you still will it." From that day on, the prince was no longer a beggar or pot seller or kitchen porter, but a prince once more. though where once his pride was what people spoke of, now it was his generosity and kindness. Good night. Sleep well, and I'll see you tomorrow for another bedtime story.